This video is for teachers who are doing day 19 of Unit 3 in the Passport to Social Studies curriculum. The objective is for students to continue to practice honing their historical empathy skills, which is, as a reminder, is part of their summative assessment for this unit, and to also evaluate the work of Tammany Hall and consider how this affects their understanding of this era as being one of either progress or decline. This video will provide not only an overview of this lesson, but also some ideas for how it can be modified to address the strengths and needs of your students. This lesson starts off by exposing the students to some of the key concepts that they're going to need, along with their definitions. And they are supposed to use these definitions to basically provide an example or make a connection to today's world. In the preceding notes to teacher slide, it does mention that a modification that can be made is for you to adjust this slide so that the students also generate their own definitions too. If this activity was the foundation, then this one shows us the application of this information. We see here that the students are being asked to frame their prior knowledge about the disparities between the rich and poor during the Gilded Age using these new terms. If students are able to do this, I would have them review their prior work, and those would be in days 13 to 18. But if that's not feasible for whatever reason, or you'd rather have the students access their prior knowledge through a visual stimulation, you can provide them thumbnails of relevant images that they saw in these lessons, like on a collage slide, to kind of like jog their memories as they do this. The students then move on to reading this primary source by George W. Plunkett, who's one of the members of Tammany Hall. And this really does provide the space for students to deepen their understanding about graft. Like it says here, they should take notes about at least two things about what they thought the author was saying. And before having the students tackle this question here at the bottom, you may want to find a way to have them distinguish between honest and dishonest graft, because that's really what that bottom question is going to be about. You could have the students look back at the original definition and example they came up with, then have the students hypothesize what a corrupt politician might consider examples of honest graft to be. If you've been following the Passport curriculum, your students have been working on their historical perspective skills, and I would frame this discussion along those lines. You might facilitate a discussion leading the students to consider where a corrupt politician would draw the distinction between the two and why they would want to do this. Some of the students may also benefit from having the language of perspective tool available as well. Before working on some Thomas Nast cartoons independently, the students will examine one as kind of a model, and it also has 3 guiding questions over here on the right. After reading the title and the context and the citation information with the class, I would then show this image of Boss Tweed from the Library of Congress. And I would instruct the students to really study his face. Then I would go back to the cartoon and ask the students to identify that individual here, and then reread the title. At that point, I would say that the students are probably ready to move on to the 3 guiding questions. Now, as this is a model before they work independently on a Nast cartoon of their choosing, you may also decide it is in your students' best interests to share out their responses to these questions, which might allow them to self-assess and also allow you to gauge student understanding before they move forward. It might also be a good idea to ask students to connect the Plunkett text with this cartoon and even use some of those vocabulary words from the beginning of the lesson in their responses. Making the connection between these components of the lesson would really aid the students in establishing the historical context of Tammany Hall. With the model completed, the students should be comfortable to try this on their own, and they can select any one of these 3. The students are able to preview each before making their decision. However, it is very important that they fully understand the task and its purpose. Ultimately, the students will be using the historical empathy tool when reading a piece by Terry Galway, who is more sympathetic towards the Tammany machine than most other historians. Their narrative they create for the cartoon they select will serve as the foundation for the context in their historical empathy tool. Now, as we say here, it should be short and it should contain a distinct beginning, middle, and end. And the purpose of this is to keep the students focused and only include the most pertinent information. Once the students have analyzed their Nast cartoon and written their narrative in one of these three boxes, we are now moving on to the heart of this lesson, which is reading that Galway piece that is an alternative perspective on Tammany Hall. Before getting into this activity, you definitely want to remind students of the work they have previously done on historical empathy. Because of this, because they've seen so much of this concept lately, rereading this given definition here and explaining it in their own words may be enough. Like I mentioned earlier, if you've been following the Passport curriculum, you can even draw their attention back to the work that they created on day 14 of this unit. And if the students would benefit from a modeling of this, you can even refer them to the video that was made solely about the historical perspective tool. To help prepare them for the historical empathy task at the end, instruct the students to annotate for these 4 look-fors. And again, they have done this at least once before, so it shouldn't be totally new to them. And also having them make comments as they go through is just another way to kind of guide their understanding of the source. And just like last time, if you think it would benefit your students to see a model so that they can self-check their annotations against, you may determine it's worthwhile to create one ahead of time. After reading the Galway text, the next step is to work through the historical empathy protocol. I would provide my students with these few friendly reminders. For step 1, I would remind them that they've seen some very different perspectives on Tammany Hall so far. They've saw George Plunkett's point of view along with Terry Galway's. However, they also created a narrative based on the Thomas Nast cartoon. So they have a lot they can pull from when contextualizing Tammany Hall, and that it should be pretty balanced between the two perspectives. In step 2, for this activity, I would also remind them that we are now looking at the perspective of those who supported Tweed. And in the third step, I would, again, just a friendly reminder, this is not about sympathizing. Empathy does not mean sympathy. There is a check for understanding on slide 28, and with time being as limited as it is, I would definitely focus on these 2 questions if I was going to check for understanding before moving on to the wrap-up. The second one could also be used to demonstrate their ability to connect and synthesize ideas from multiple sources. And the third is kind of a precursor to the culminating writing prompt. And from there, they should now have the foundation to construct a very well-written response about the impact that political machines like Tammany Hall had on American society.